2004 Volkswagen Beetle 1.8 turbo timing belt and water pump replacement. I'm Brian Essen from How To Automotive, and I'm going to walk you through that process. Get started by removing the top engine cover by putting your hands underneath here, pulling upwards, and then pulling towards you. Next, we're going to remove the top engine cover by flipping the clips here on the corners, and this one's actually missing. So once you get the cover popped out, you can just pull up on it. Looks like we're going to have to pull this hose off here, so remove the squeeze clamp and pull the hose and set it aside. Now that you got the cover off, you go ahead and set it aside. The owner of this car got really lucky. As you can see how loose the timing belt is, it almost came off. And the symptom of that would be a rattling noise. Now I'm going to go ahead and rack this vehicle up and remove the right front wheel. Next we need to remove the lower shield, so just follow every couple inches or so there's a torque bolt, and just follow it around and remove all the torque bolts and remove the lower shield. After removing all the torque bolts, the torque screws that are here, go ahead and remove the two 13s on this side and the two 13s on this side, the bolts, and then the shield, the lower shield should come off. There's also two 13mm at the very nose of the shield too, remove those. Now that we got the lower shield off, we need to get this intercooler pipe off. And to do that, if you look around the inside of the shield, there's the hose clamp. You're going to loosen up the hose clamp there at the intercooler pipe. And then after you get that hose clamp loose, there's a 10mm bolt right here. Go ahead and remove that, and then loosen the hose clamp here, and then wiggle the pipe out. Now that you got the intercooler pipe off, now you can, on this low inner shield here, you can pry down right here, and this little thing right here will flare out, so you can pry it straight down. And then there's going to be one just like this above over here, and you're going to pull them both straight down and pull this shield off. And the next step we need to do is get the drive belt off. And I wanted to show you this little trick here, or a little thing. So right here on the ear, if you move this hose out of the way, you can see the tensioner here. There's a hole that's right here, and then a little further back on the tensioner, let's see if I can fit, there's a little hole back there. So what you do is you pry this over with a 17 wrench, and then once the holes line up, you'll take a pin like this, a dowel pin or Allen wrench or whatever you can get. It'll fit in there, and you'll slide it through. So as you can see, I got the pin in there now, and then what I'll do is I'll reach around the back like this and kind of maneuver this coolant hose out of the way. I'm also just going to go ahead and take the hose clamp off here, off the inlet throttle body here, and just pop the boot off and take this hose off here. That'll aid in getting your 17 wrench and rotating it far enough to get the tensioner off. So once you get the snorkel, the boot off, and the little vent, the evap vent hose off the throttle body there, you put your wrench on there and pull the tensioner back towards the front of the car, and then you can line the two pinholes up like that. And then once you get the two pinholes up, you can take the wrench off, and now the belt is loose, and the tensioner is held into place by the pin. And like I said, you can use like an Allen wrench or whatever will fit in there. So now that we got the belt and the tensioner held in place, now we can go ahead and remove the two 13mm bolts here, and that'll actually remove the whole tensioner itself will actually come out, and we can remove it from the car. I had said 2 bolts, but there's 3 bolts holding it in. Now that you get it unbolted, you can work it out right here next to the throttle body and pull it out of the car. And now here's a closer look at that pin that I was telling you about, how it goes through and holds it in place. So what I like to do is also take the bolts that went with it and just kind of put them back in there, and just put it away in a safe spot. Now you can lift the vehicle back up and go ahead and take out the 4 Allens for the crank pulley, and take the crank pulley off. So after removing the bolts on the crank pulley, there's a little nipple in there. I like to just put a little dab of whiteout on there and on the pulley, so when you go to reassemble, you put it back the same way. Now that we got the crank pulley off, we can go ahead and remove the 10mm bolts that are holding the lower timing cover on. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. Go ahead and remove those, and then you can remove the timing cover out. So after getting the lower timing cover off, we need to work on getting this motor mount out. We're gonna start by taking this bolt out here, the 16mm bolt here, and if you look a little further above, there's a 16mm bolt there too, and I got my ratchet on it. And if you look, you can reach around. So if you look through the axle and reach around from behind and get your ratchet set up on there, and you crack it free, and then you can spin the bolt out. Go ahead and take out those 2 bolts, and then we're going to lower the vehicle back down. After you get the 2 bolts unbolted, I was able to get the upper one completely out, but the lower one won't come completely out, but that's okay. It'll hit the frame, whatever, but that's okay. Now what we're going to do is just push it back in a little bit. We're going to lower the vehicle down, and then we're going to get a floor jack with a block of wood, and we're going to put it right here underneath the oil pan and jack it up a little bit. I'll show you that in just a second. I got the floor jack under here, and that's my setup on it. And I have it slightly to the right towards the driver's side a little bit, because we're going to get a coolant bucket under here to catch the coolant when we... So now what we're going to do is kind of maneuver the hoses out of our way a little bit like this, and remove the 2 bolts here. And then also on the side of the motor mount, we're going to remove the bolt there. And on the opposite side, we're going to remove that bolt there. So I want to mention that you're going to jack a couple pumps and lift the engine just a little bit to take a look. So when you take those motor mounts out, the engine doesn't try to fall or whatever. You want to jack it up just a 1/4 inch or so. On the bolts, I just use a long extension and my impact gun like that, and kind of just, it might be a little excessively long, but you get the point. So normally I would work around these hoses and stuff, but in this case I think it would be best if I go ahead and just remove them. So if you need to make your own marks or whatever so you can get them back together on the right spot, but I recommend go ahead and taking these hose clamps off and taking all these hoses, and you can kind of flip them up out of your way. I also decided to go ahead and take the coolant reservoir bottle out. So in the corner right there is a Phillips screwdriver, and then in the back corner is a 10mm bolt, and you'll have to get to it with a wobble, a deep socket with a wobble set up to get to that bolt. Go ahead and remove the hose clamp here, and then there's also a hose and hose clamp here you can remove in one electrical connector. And then once you get that all out, the whole bottle will come out, and then you have all kinds of room to work with the timing belt and stuff. So you got the coolant reservoir about on the motor mount here. You can also see there's another little bracket here. Take those 2 13s out, take that bracket out, and then the top half of this motor mount should come out. So now that I got the lower motor mount out, what I did was took a bungee cord, grab all the hoses and pull them back, kind of bungeed it up against the hinge. So now we're going to switch our focus to getting the lower part of the mount out. We've already taken 2 of the bolts out from below. So right here is the next bolt, the 16mm you're going to take out, so go ahead and take that out. So now that we got the motor mount unbolted and it's just kind of loose and hanging in there, what we need to do is get this timing belt set up at top dead center. And the reason why is we got to take this tensioner out in this in the pulley, and to get the motor mount out, so the way it won't come out with it in there. So what we're going to do is just kind of set everything up, and then what we'll do is we'll jack the engine up a little bit, and we'll maneuver the engine mount in areas where we can get to the bolts to remove the tensioner. But the first step is to get the timing belt top dead center. So you crank the engine around by the lower crank bolt, and then right here on the cam, as you can see, this mark is green. It has a little slash mark on it, and then there's a little slash mark on the top of the valve cover there. So you want that to line up. So I went ahead and mounted a couple bolts back up on the lower cover, and then if you look right here, let's see, let me find it. Right there's a little indentation mark. You can barely see it, but if you can feel it more with your finger. So I'm going to go ahead and put my crank pulley back on temporarily and line up my paint marks that I made before. So I'll put a couple bolts in there, and then what I'm going to do is look from above and look and see if that little hash mark here and that little hash mark are aligned. And if they do align, then if say that hash mark is 180 out over here, then that means you're 180 out, and you rotate the cam around until it lines up on top and bottom again. So you want the timing mark to line up right there. So here I am from below. I got my cover temporarily bolted back up, and then I got my thing, and you can see the hash mark and you can see that the nipple, it's hard to see on camera, but the nipple is there, and they're lined up. So what we're going to do next, go ahead and remove this again and remove the cover here. So I know my cam and my crank now are dead on top dead center, so what I'm going to do is take some white out like this, and I'm going to make a mark on the back of, in the inside here, on the cam pulley and on the inside of the engine block, and make a witness mark. So now I made my own mark, just so for my own reference. So I painted the whole tooth, and then I made a mark on the inside there, and that way I don't have to put all that stuff back together on top to make sure it's all lined, you know, the cover and the crank pulley back on to make sure everything's lined. I can just use my own reference mark when I go to reassemble this. So now that I got that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack the engine up about as high as I can get it. And when you jack the engine up, you also want to hold on to the engine mount here and make sure it doesn't get caught or pinched. So I jacked the engine up pretty high where the inside of this, where the mount for the air cleaner goes, is just about to touch the cowling here. So the engine's up pretty high, and this motor mount almost will come out, but it won't quite come out without the tensioner in the way. So now we've got everything lined up. What I'm going to do is on the inside of the new one, so there's a couple bolts. You're going to remove a 10mm bolt here and a 10mm bolt here, and then you can maneuver this, kind of just wiggle it around whatever position you need to get access to the bolts. And then once you get those unbolted, then the whole tensioner will come out, the belt will come off, and change out the water pump after that. Now that you got the tensioner bolted, you can go ahead and just wiggle it out, work it out, however it'll come out. So we got that out. Now you can go ahead and remove the belt, the timing belt itself. And I actually just rotated it in a way where it's kind of out of my way. So now we're ready to tackle the water pump. So there's going to be, I believe there's 4 10mm bolts. So 1, 2, 3. Actually, there's only 3 bolts. So go ahead and remove the 3 10mm bolts, and the water pump itself is just held on with an O-ring inside. And it'll come off, and make sure you have your bucket below ready to catch your. I had to use a little pry bar to pry the water pump out, but once I got it out, it came out pretty easily. So now what we're going to do is we're going to wipe the surfaces down and clean them up, and then we're going to reinstall our new water pump and put the 3 bolts in and torque them down to 11 foot-pounds. About to reinstall my bolts, and what I did was I took a little bit of a blue loctite and put them on the water pump bolts. So that helped. They don't have any lock washers or anything, so I don't want anything to vibrate loose or come loose. So just for a little extra security, I put a little blue loctite or thread sealer. Also, when I put this water pump in, I put a little grease on this seal, a little silicone-based grease, and that helps helps it slide in, and it helps prevent it from snagging the O-ring and ripping it. So now we're getting ready to put the timing belt back together, and before I do that, I want to replace this idler pulley. So I'm going to take the Allen screw out here and take the idler pulley off. We're about to install our idler pulley, and we're going to make sure that this washer is on the back. And make sure you don't lose that. And then I also put a little of the blue Loctite on there. So we'll go ahead and put it in there and start our bolt. After installing our idler pulley and tightening it down, I tried looking for the spec for torque, but I couldn't find it. It wasn't listed in the all data. So if you don't have that washer on the back, you won't be able to spin the pulley like this. So you've got to make sure that that washer's in there. So make sure you tighten it. And I would recommend that blue Loctite or thread sealer. So the next part is tricky. We're gonna install the belt, the mount, and the tensioner kind of all 3 at the same time. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to make sure that the bottom bolt didn't fall out in any way that's in here, so because you can't put that bolt in once it's mounted in there. So make sure that bolt's in there, it didn't fall out. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang the belt over the pulley and kind of route it in there. So I put the belt around the top crank pulley, and I routed it where it goes over the cam pulley, and then it goes down to the water pump. I didn't put it on the crank pulley down there below yet. The motor mount goes through, so you want to make sure that it goes. So when it's done, it looks like that. So you want to route it like that. And now you can maneuver the motor mount back to where, in a position where it's out of the way. And you want to make sure that this ear right here is flipped upwards. And now you can go ahead and install your new tensioner. And you're going to put the Loctite on the bolts, the two 10mm bolts here, and torque these down to 11 foot-pounds. Okay, so what I did was I rotated the motor mount out of my way like this. Put the belt over the tensioner, routed around like that, kind of in the way it goes. So then you got to make sure that this ear on the tensioner is flipped upwards as far as you can go. Then you slip the tensioner in from underneath, and you line up the bolt holes here, and you start it, and then you reach around the back like this, and you start the other bolt hole. And now you can position the belt. So actually now what we're going to do is we're going to put the crank pulley, the belt on the crank pulley first, and slip it off one of the other pulleys here. So we're going to put it around the crank pulley first, and then what we're going to do is on the water pump side, we're going to pull all the slack out of it and route it around the water pump. And then what we want to do is route it around the crank pulley, the cam pulley, where there's no slack. So you want to pull this thing as tight as you can get it around there, around the crank pulley where there's absolutely no slack. I forgot to mention, you also want to make sure that the belt is on the so around the crank pulley, against the little idler pulley here, route it over the idler pulley here. Now you want to pull the tension on the water pump side, pull it completely where it's tight as you can get it, and then you want to slip it on over the cam, but you want zero slack on this side. You want it as tight as you can get it. And at the same time, you want to keep eyeballing your mark down here that you made, and make sure that the crank doesn't turn, and also you want to make sure that the cam doesn't turn or rotate. You can see your alignment mark. So it wasn't easy to put this timing belt on because there's quite a bit of tension on it. So like I said, I lined my mark up down below here on the crank first, put the belt on, make sure there was no slack, pulled the belt where there's no slack, and I actually put a wrench on there to kind of hold it in place because it wanted to rotate the crank on me. So then I rotated it around, put it around the crank pulley, but I slid it on just barely on the edge of the belt, on the edge of it, and then got it over the idler pulley here. And then once I got it over, then I was able to push it on, kind of like grab my hands right behind here and push with my hands to push it on. And quite a bit of work. So now that I got the belt on, so now you look at your timing mark that you made and confirm that it's on, and then you look at your mark here, your green mark, and then you look at the hash mark and you see that it's on right there. Now you're ready to pull the grenade pin out. So you can go ahead and pull the pin out, and once you get the pin out, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the engine around. So I'm going to rotate this crank pulley around, so it's going to go, this mark is going to come around 2 times. On the second time I want to line it back up with my mark there, and then once that's done, I'm going to double check my mark here. And if everything lines back up after rotating the engine, the crank pulley 2 times around, then you know the timing is back on. And you can also confirm it by putting your lower cover back on and putting your idler pulley back on. So if you are reusing your tensioner, which is not advised, especially on Volkswagen, they go out. So this one's I actually can move this one with my fingers. You can see how the tensioner is, it's bad. So what you would have had done is put this in a vise and press the piston in, and then put a pin in there before you reassemble. Now you can raise or lower the engine up or down, left or right. Up or down, I should say, until you can line up the bolts here for the motor mount. Go ahead and start this mount here. Make sure before you do that, make sure this mount below doesn't come out. And once you got this one mounted, you can go ahead and reach below like this, like I am here, and you can go ahead and start the bottom bolt. Then you can jack the engine. Once you got this bolt here started, and the one below, the very bottom bolt started, then you can jack the engine up higher, and you can take the one that goes here and you can start it. And you can go ahead and, probably with an air ratchet, you might be able to even get in here and tighten up both of these bolts here. Once those are both tightened and the bottom one's started, then you can lower the engine back down into its general area where it's the way it's supposed to go, and you can put on your engine mount here. So once I got the engine kind of level where it's kind of where I want it to be, I'll go ahead and start all 4 of the major engine mount bolts. And then once I got them all 4 started, I try to I'll tighten up these first, and then after those are tight, I'll tighten up these bolts first, second, and then I'll lower the jack down, and then I'll go ahead and install my little bracket. Now that the engine mount is remounted and bolted back up, I'm gonna lift the vehicle back up and reinstall the lower timing covers, and then I'll install the crank pulley. So you're gonna put the lower cover on first and put the 2 lower bolts on, and then you'll put the top cover on, and then you'll start the bolt on the water pump, and then you'll put the 2, and then this lays overlaps the bottom, the inner pulley, and then you just go ahead and start those. And once you got them all started, then you tighten them all down. You got the timing covers tight, go ahead and tighten up the lower motor mount bolt right here. And then you'll put the crank pulley back on, and you'll put the blue Loctite on the threads, and you'll tighten those at 19 foot-pounds. Now that I got the crank pulley and timing covers all back on, I'm gonna go ahead and put my belt tensioner on. Actually, before I put the belt tensioner on, I'm gonna put the upper cover on, slide it on. Now that, especially since I got all the hoses and stuff out, kind of just routes back in there, kind of like so. And you want it to kind of catch in right there at the bottom of the corner. When that's in there, you'll just snap the little ear over, and then on the back side, there's a little same thing. You'll snap that on. And now that you got the upper cover on, now you can go ahead and put your belt tensioner on and go ahead and tighten these 3 bolts here. Now that the tensioner is bolted back up, now you can go ahead and reinstall your belt, or in my case I'm putting a new belt on. So put it around the crank pulley first, then around I lifted the vehicle back up to route the belt on. So I started with the alternator pulley at the top, then went around the AC like that. It kind of S-ed over the power steering and then over the crank, and then you can see the tensioner up there. So now I'm going to lower it down. I'm going to release the tension off the tension. So now I'm just going to put my 17 wrench on it, spring it back just a little bit, take the pressure off, and then pull that pin out, and then release the wrench, and it'll apply the tension to the belt. Now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my coolant reservoir and all the hoses that went to it. To get to the back bolt on the coolant reservoir, I took the socket here, stuffed a piece of paper in there, and then stuffed the nut in there, and now I can kind of maneuver this around the back side like this, and then I can start my bolt. So now that you got the coolant reservoir bolted back up, you can go ahead and install all your hoses. So the lower hose, the hose here, every hose that you took off. So go ahead and install those back on. The coolant hoses, the fuel hoses, or hopefully you took pictures on how everything went, and then you put it right back the way it was. So you put them all on and start all the clamps. Now that you got all the fuel lines and coolant lines reattached back over here, go ahead and reinstall your boot. Put on your air cleaner here, on the throttle body here, and start the clamp. Now you can just double check that everything's routed right and reconnect it here. And once you're satisfied with that, now you can lift the vehicle up, and we're going to put the lower shields back on. Now we're going to take our lower shield and put it back up there the way it came off. Once you get it routed in there the way it goes, then these little spring tabs just push on like that, and that holds the shield in place. Now that you got the side shield on, we're going to put the intercooler hose on first and clamps. So we'll hook this pipe back up here. Now it's time to, after getting the intercooler pipe bolted back up, it's time to put the lower shield back on. After you get the lower shield bolted on, put your right front wheel on and torque it down. Now that you got the lower shields on and the wheel back on and torqued down, you can go ahead and put the top engine cover on, which just slides into the little groove back there, like that, and then you line it up, and you just kind of push it down like that, and that locks it into place. Now we're going to fill it up with coolant. So So you're going to fill it up with Volkswagen approved coolant. It's like a pinkish, purplish looking colored coolant. This is one of the brands that we use. So you're going to fill the coolant up to the coolant marks on the bottle. There's a little mark indicator. Fill it up, run the car until the cooling fans run. You want to make sure the heater is off and the AC is off. Make sure that, you want to run the car until the cooling fans run and the thermostat opens up. And once that's achieved, you keep double checking your level, and the level may drop. And then after your thermostat has opened up, your cooling fans have run, you confirmed all that, then you can put your cap on and go for a test drive. And that pretty much completes the timing belt, water pump, and all the tensioners and pulley replacement on a 2004 Volkswagen Beetle 1.8 turbo. I'm Brian Essex from How To Automotive, and I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos. I encourage you to subscribe for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again.